Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Carlo. I'm here with my cousin Dylan as always. We are All You Can Board, and today we are doing episode 5 in our running series called Own It, Play It, Skip It. So this is, they're sort of mini reviews, but looked at through a different lens, more of the ownership perspective. Sometimes there might be games where we thought the game might not be good, but it might be worth playing because there's some very novel mechanic, or we basically just try and classify them whether you should skip it altogether, not worth your time, worth maybe just a play, check it out if you have the opportunity, or worth owning. So we're going to look at 6 games. We've each picked 3, and I'm going to throw it over to Dylan to kick us off with the first one here.
Sure. The first game I'm going to look at is a little game for 2 players called Mandala. It says for 2 players right on there, so you never forget. Mandala is one that the reason I took so long to play this is because I thought the game was Mancala. That's literally, I saw it talked about. I'm like, yeah, I played that before. Why is it being packaged by Lookout Games as if it's a new game?
Yeah, who do these designers think they are claiming credit for this ancient game?
I was a little bit like, this is very weird and seems like money grabby. And then I realized it's a completely different game called Mandala. And I'm glad I found that out because Mandala is an absolute joy. I played this at a game cafe first and played it multiple times after I'd already bought my copy, actually, and then I played my personal copy as well. But Mandala is a really interesting game where you have these 2 mandalas on this cloth piece. I can actually quickly open this. Like, it comes with this actual piece of cloth that is really interesting. Like, it's a full cloth board that you get to unfold as if it's like a towel in your closet. That has which I just think is really, it fits the aesthetic and the theme of the game. But
looks like actual tablecloth
material.
Yeah,
it's really neat. Yeah. So it has 2 mandalas on it, and you're gonna be playing cards of different colors to one of the 2 mandalas of your choice. A single color, like green for instance, cannot exist more than once in a mandala, and there's 3 spots they can be played. Your own personal, what is it called? There's a name for it, your personal area, but essentially I have a personal area, the opponent has a personal area, and then there's the mountain that, I think it's called the field, I can't remember. But the mountain is the sort of shared joint area. My color of green, for instance, can only exist in one of those spots. So if my opponent plays green in their personal area, I can no longer play green in my personal area or the mountain. No one can. So you have to kind of manage which colors are being played, and you don't clear a mandala and score it until every single color is present in one of the spots. So it's really interesting having to try to figure out when to play certain colors where, because sometimes you have say 4 of a color in your hand, and that means you can do a lot with that color. You can manipulate scoring first, picking first from the mountain to score on the mandala. But if someone else plays that color before you have a chance to, suddenly I could have an entire hand that's locked out, and I have to just choose to discard on my hand because I waited too long to play those colors. So that is a really interesting strategic system, but also the way you score is you have your field area. I think, I honestly can't remember the names of all these things, but the personal, second personal area you have that is at the very bottom has a spot for every single color in it. Every time you have a mountain that gets cleared, you're going to pull one of those colors and designate it to a spot on that track. Once they're all full, that's going to trigger the end of the game. But once the further ones to the left score less than the ones you're going to add at the very end to the right. So if I put black there first, it's only going to score me 1 point or 2 points for every single black card I end up getting. But if I put it on the end, black might be worth 6 points or whatever the last one is worth. I can't even remember if you can see it there, but you can. I know it's definitely 1 that it starts with. But say the last one's 6. Now every black card I collect is going to be worth 6 points instead. So you're also trying to time which colors you add where and which ones you clear off the mountain. So there's a ton of decision making going on in this game. The first time I played it, it's one of those games where the first time you play it, you're not going to be able to strategize. You're going to have to learn the rules. Even though you might understand the rules perfectly, the strategy is going to be something you grasp while you play. Play it again right away, which is what I did. And that second game, you're going to approach it with all that knowledge and that strategy, and it's going to be way more enjoyable, and you're really going to see the beauty of a game like this. 2-player games that are super simple, super quick setup, super simple to teach and to play as well, but have this depth of strategy are some of my favorite 2-player games, and some of the reasons I gravitate towards them. Even just the box size and the playtime and everything reminds me a lot of Patchwork in that same sense. It kind of fits in that same niche.
Same publisher.
Yep. It's a really, really great game. So Mandala is going to actually be an own it for me. Nice. Honestly, the only reason I wouldn't say own it is if you don't like 2-player games, or if you don't play them a lot. If you want to get into a session and always play 4-player games, it's going to just sit on your shelf and collect dust. But if you play 2-player games at any level and you're looking for these quicker plain ones, this one says it plays in around 20 minutes. And honestly, that's after you get the rules under your belt, that's probably accurate. It can go really, really quick, especially because there's, I think, the multiple ways that a game can end. It can end if the deck gets depleted, or if you fill all your slots. And I can decide to power through and just fill my board really quick if I think I'm in the lead. So I could end a game a lot earlier than my opponent's expecting. So has a lot working in its favor. I'm a huge fan, and I'm definitely going to be playing a lot more of it. That's an Own It Mandala.
Cool, and this is just for anyone who watches the channel regularly and has seen us talk about Great Plains before. It's the same publishing company and same design team, and this is another one that also says 20 minutes on the box. So
yeah.
How would you compare which one, if I put you on the spot right now, which one do you like more so far?
Out of Great Plains and Mandala?
Yeah.
I would say Mandala a little bit, only because Great Plains has a lot of elements that I've seen in other games and I prefer in other games, even though I still love Great Plains. Whereas Mandala, there's things I can attribute to other games, but the whole aspect of like the different places you can place your cards and the way something clears and having the two Mandalas you're playing at the same time, there's a lot that feels very unique compared to other games I've played, and that's what I think jumped out to me a little bit more.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Mandala.
Very eager to play that one with you. I have not played it yet.
And it only takes 20 minutes, so it'll be an easy one to fit in.
Exactly. All right. First up that I'm going to be talking about today is Corrosion.
It's a big one.
Yeah, so this is designed by Stefan Bauer. It's his debut design, co-published by Deep Print Games and Capstone Games. This was actually sent to us as a review copy from Capstone. So I'm going to lay the box down just in case. Can't tell how big that looks on camera. But this is basically an engine building game for 1 to 4 players. It's fairly new, just came out in 2021. But it's a game where, I mean, the title says it all, Corrosion. So you're building engines, but unlike most engine building games, your engines will corrode. They'll basically rust, fall apart, break down, and you have to be rebuilding them. So it says right on the box, 60 to 120 minutes. I would say it's tough to say where the playtime falls, because first off, I haven't played it yet with 3 or 4 players. I've only been able to try it solo and 2 players. But when we played it with 2 players, I think that was one of the issues we had, was that it was our first play. We were both learning it and whatever, but it took us, I think it was around 2.5 hours, which felt long, especially for this type of game for us.
Even for, obviously every time you play a game for the first time, it usually takes longer, but that still felt really long.
Yeah, that's the thing. It still felt like, even if we had shaved off 20, 30 minutes, it might have felt still long for what it was. So the idea of the game is you have these, every player starts off with these 6 engineer cards in your hand, and it's going to be a little bit reminiscent of something like Concordia or Sentry Golem or Fayum, where you have these starting cards, and on your turn you play a card and then basically do what the card says. So it might say, you can take one of these chrome machines from the market, or, gain some steam in your steam engine, or get some points, whatever. And then these cards stay out in front of you, and you have this little wheel that has 4 quadrants on it that say 1, 2, 3, and 4. And basically, on your turn, you're either playing one of the engineer cards from your hand, and the number on the engineer, it'll have different colors, and it'll say, let's say it's a number 2, it goes into the number 2 quadrant, right? And it'll stay there, and you get your cards back later. But unlike those games where I mentioned, like Concordia, where you play a card that gets your cards back, your other option other than playing cards is you're turning this corrosion wheel, and whenever the wheel turns and the spot with the X reaches a space where one of your cards are, you get to pick up those cards. But you have other ways that you can make those cards move to a quicker spot so that you get them back sooner. You can spend water on your turn. There's all these free anytime actions you can do, like spending water or steam to make the card come one step closer. So there's this interesting dynamic of, you have these limited number of cards in your hand. There's kind of this hand management. And as you start emptying out your hand, you start feeling that need to turn your corrosion wheel to start getting cards back. But one of the things you can do with those cards is buy more cards. So there's new engineers that have different, more powerful abilities that help set you apart from the other players. And when you play a card, the other thing I didn't mention is, let's say I play a card that has a green number 2 on it. Before I resolve the effect, all other players at the table are going to have the opportunity to play a color, or a card of the same color with a higher number. So if he has a green 3, he can also play his card, and rather than it triggering the ability on his card, he's going to piggyback off of my action. So we've seen that in games before, things like Race for the Galaxy, Glass Road, where you're piggybacking off of other people's actions. And then, once you turn the wheel a certain amount of times, your engine basically breaks down, you lose pieces of it, and then you're kind of starting over again. So it feels a lot different than other engine builders, because you don't have this arc where the game feels like you're constantly getting more and more powerful, and then the game ends at the kind of height of your power before you've used your machine. In Corrosion, sometimes you feel less powerful at the end because you've broken down one of your more powerful machines earlier. It has a lot of interesting stuff going on, but the game is not without its faults. The biggest fault I would say so far from us was the playtime, but the other thing was the scoring. I know you and I both right away, this stood out to us, and I looked over the game sheets again before filming this, and in that first game, those goal cards that you get, do you remember the ones that you put out that come in pairs, 2 of the same of each kind? And at the end of the game, we looked, and I had 2 of a kind of the same one, and each one was like 20 some points. And final score was like 100.
Yeah.
So I had 2 tiles that got me like 40 some points. Yeah. And you had a tile that got you like 8 or 10 or 12 points. But even if you had done better with it, we looked at it and we thought, even if you had like maximized how many points you could have got, there's no way you would have gotten as many as I had from those. And why does the game let the same player buy 2 of the same objective? Like, if I'm getting 22 points off of a card, and you're obviously, like, if you had bought the second one, like, someone would say, oh, well, then the other player should buy the second one. Well, but then you're wasting an action buying something that might only get you, like, 4 points. Like, but otherwise, I'm buying this thing that just, like, doubles my points, essentially. Felt a bit off. And it just, it sits in a weird spot for me, okay? And I'll say right now, this is a play it for me. And I hesitated because after our first play, when we played it with 2 players, I was leaning more towards a skip it. I was thinking, like, I wasn't even almost looking forward to going back and playing it a second time. But going back and playing it a couple times solo, I actually enjoyed it more on subsequent plays. Still not to the point where I don't think I'm ever going to be the one to suggest at game night, oh, we should play Corrosion. Don't think this will stick around in my collection long term. But there's a lot of cool stuff here that I think like, first off, the engine rusting and having to be rebuilt, I've never seen that in another game before. The way you play your cards and the different ways you can build your engine and piggyback off other people, there's a lot of cool stuff to explore in the game, but it sits in this weird spot where, if we compare just to other engine builders, okay? You've got these like more light, medium weight engine builders. You think of games in the range of like Splendor, Gizmos, Furnace, those kinds of games that play in 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even half an hour once you're really quick with the game, right? Then if you look on the heavier end, you've got games like Terraforming Mars and Arca Nova, which is new as these bigger, longer strategy games. And this falls almost in between them where, in those other shorter ones, they're more tactical games. You don't come up with this long-term strategy. In this game, it feels like it's because of the longer playtime, you feel compelled to come up with a strategy, but because your machine just keeps breaking down and you rebuild it, the game feels like it overstays its welcome because those super interesting parts of the engine crumbling is like, it happens multiple times early enough in the game that I felt like if the game ended half hour, 40 minutes earlier, I think it would have felt more punchy and more satisfying start to finish. But as it is, even when I played it solo and enjoyed it more, I still found myself wishing it had ended a little bit sooner. So,
yeah, it's. I'll even be a little bit more critical, but I've also played it less than you. In that, like, if I was the one like currently having to rate it, I probably would have been doing to skip it. But that being said, I still admire a whole bunch of things about it, and there's a lot I do like. The issue I can identify is that it just feels like there's so many things that so many things that seem interesting or unique or whatever going on that they in some way clash with when it comes to my enjoyment of it, that the design of the game and the game itself doesn't feel as clean as I would like it to feel. It's just at times feels messy and a bit like disjointed. Like I like in games where you playing a card lets me piggyback off, like the way like things like Glass Road and stuff like that. So I like that. I like that, and that's in here. And then it has this new thing about it's an engine builder that they degrade over time. Very neat concept, but that's another thing on top of the original one. And then also it has this rondelle wheel that I know is tied into the Corrosion, but again is another thing you're managing that is unique. And all these things in conjunction create an experience that just feels a little disjointed to me compared to if it was just one of those things was the main like special thing about the game.
Yes.
I probably would have been enough for me to enjoy it, because the idea of your machinery corroding and these temporary engines is a cool idea. It just didn't land with me because of with everything else going on, the scoring issues and the time length. It just was an experience that I thought I can get this feel out of a different game in half the time, and it feels more rewarding at the end of it,
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. It feels a little bit underdeveloped, maybe. Like there's, if the rules were a little simpler, the gameplay was a little, and maybe if it was a little bit more focused on the rusting and that corrosion aspect, we could recommend it more highly. The reason why it ended up being a play instead of a skip for me is when I think about other games I've mentioned as skips, like Mercado de Lisboa and Kingdom Rush, those were games that to me, the way I think of it is, do I regret the time I spent with them? Do I wish I could get that time back? And when I think about the games I've said to skip before, those are games where I thought I wish I would have spent that on something else. With Corrosion, I'm happy I played it not only once, but a couple extra times, because I haven't seen this mechanic elsewhere. And I think if you're the type of person, if you dabble in game design, or you're just the type of gamer who likes to explore and see what's out there, there's a lot of cool stuff that you won't see in other games. It's just hard for me to recommend it any more than just saying you should try it.
Yeah, and the reasons I think it doesn't resonate with me specifically could be just for me too, because if you're someone who like really loves that they've combined this new way of looking at engine builders that are temporary, as well as like the cards that have dual purpose depending on the opponent, you know, deciding to piggyback off of them. If you are like some of those are the biggest mechanics you love or things you love in games and they're combining them, this might be the perfect fit for you. It was just for me personally, I guess it wasn't landing for a lot of those reasons. But that being said, the components, the artwork, the theme, all that kind of stuff, standard usual Capstone Games greatness. Like it's a great game to handle and actually play on the table.
For sure. And I have to also give credit that they've gone and made all of the engineers on the cards, like they're all women, which is like, I like that we're seeing a little bit more of that in games these days, and that they didn't only do that because like, oh, the game is about something that women more normally gravitate towards or whatever. It's like, no, someone asked why are the women in the game? Because there's nothing wrong with it. You should see more of that. So again, that was Corrosion from Capstone Games, and this was sent to us as a review copy.
Awesome. Okay, so the game I'm going to look at next is a party game called So Clover. You've probably heard me talk about this on the channel a few different times, especially in my What I Played Last Month videos. This is a party game that I am now in love with. I have certain party games that I gravitate towards in a more general setting with people who maybe don't play games as often, or mixed with people who do. Games like Codenames, for instance, will often hit the table for me, especially because I do really like word games, and that's sort of the pinnacle of word games for me. So Clover is, I think, going to compete with it in terms of the word game that gets to the table for me, especially because it's new and shiny right now. It is a game where everyone has their own Clover that you're going to put these cards into. That's sort of, I'll put this to the other side, maybe I can zoom in on. Have these square cards that have a word on each side of the squares for 4 words. You're going to slot one of these into every spot on the Clover, and it's going to randomly, and it's going to assign 2 words together that you then have to secretly write a word that is sort of a clue that links those 2 words together. The twist here is that you're then going to remove all the cards out, shuffle them, add a single other new card in, give them to your opponent, or not opponents, your teammates, and then stay silent while they try to put your cards back and figure out which card was the one that got added in randomly to try to figure out what you were trying to lead people to with these clues. You have to think very outside the box, as some of these clues are not always going to be easy, especially if you have, like cow and firefighter as 2 words that go together. You have to figure out one word clue that links cow and firefighter, which maybe you can put like liquid because milk and the water for the firefighters, but how are they going to figure out that that's what you were trying to communicate to them, right? It is so much fun to be the person that is silent watching them. It's fun and agonizing, it's trying to see if they're going to figure out, or they're like, oh, this must be what he means, and you're like, that's not exact at all what I meant.
It's so hard to stay silent and not say like, just put that card there, or you had it the right way, what are you doing?
It's a great example of those party games where it almost doesn't even matter that you're keeping score. It does have like a high score thing that you can try to keep track of. Can you beat your high score from last time, which is neat. But honestly, it's just the fun of doing this game around the table or around the couch, whatever, that I think is just so great. I'm so happy that I got tipped off to this game. I actually heard about it on Board Game Garage's podcast first. I'd never heard of it before that. Scooped up a copy locally right after. I love this game. This is going to be an own it for me as well. 2 own it's back to back. But honestly, if you're someone who likes party games, if you like having games like this in your collection that you can play with people who do play games, who don't play games, around a couch, at a table, casually, without keeping score, whatever, or keeping score and going for the high score, it's hard to, suggest another game that's come out recently over So Clover. This just, I guess I should be saying So Clover because there's an exclamation mark in the name. But it gets one of my highest recommendations for party games. Really, if you're not into party games, or you're not into word games specifically, maybe it's a miss for you. But
or if you're playing with someone who doesn't speak this, like if you're all like someone who English isn't their first language, might struggle. But that's just a standard thing with any word game. That's not particular to So Clover, right?
I think it's just one of those games that, like Codenames, that it's going to just find us a way into a lot of people's collections as they hear about it, just sort of have in case, or have for those specific moments, because you almost never want to be in a situation where you're like, oh, I wish we had So Clover. This would be a perfect time to play it, because it's so much fun to play this game. I absolutely adore it. A definite own it for me, and a game I'm going to be playing a lot of this year.
Cool. Yeah, I liked it very much the one time I've played it. And I would say one of its biggest strengths that, I don't know yet where it's going to land for me in terms of comparing it to, like, Just One and Codenames and all that. But I do like the fact that in this game, everyone is doing, like, the part where you're giving the clues or coming up with your own thing on your board, everyone's doing that at the same time.
Yeah,
Whereas in
good
just
point.
one, you know, it's like you put the card out, everyone's coming up with clues, and you're just kind of sitting there waiting for people to come up with clues. Code names, same thing. You're just kind of watching people try and solve. In this one, I like that everyone has their head down doing stuff at the same time, so there's a bit less downtime, which is cool.
Yeah, really good point. I never thought of that, but yeah, that's true. That is so Clover. That is an Own It.
Nice. All right, next up for me is a game called Mining Colony. So this is designed by Steve Finn, published by Dr. Finn's Games, and this was also sent to us as a review copy. So this is a game for 1 to 4 players. It says on the box plays in about 40 minutes. I think that sounds about right. It's basically a polyomino game where everyone has their own little board, and you're basically colonizing. I think when I taught you to play, I think I said it was Mars, and then I was reading through the rules saying it's not actually Mars.
No.
It just says some resource-rich planet or something like
Your
that.
home
I'm like,
world.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So you've got a board, and then there's a central board where these kind of, let's call them market offerings, come up every round. The game plays over 10 rounds, and every player has a deck of these initiative cards. So there's cards ranging from 1 to 48. Every player has 12 of these cards, okay? And so, like I said, the game plays over 10 rounds, so every round you're going to have 3 of these cards in your hand, and you're going to basically flip over a card from another deck that's going to show what comes up on this market offering that are going to be the sort of resources and tiles that players will be able to grab. So you'll fill out the spaces based on the player count. Then you're going to have those 3 cards in your hand that determine your initiative. You're going to play 1 secretly face down, and the other 2 go to the bottom of your deck. Then all players simultaneously are going to flip their card, and similar to other games, it's going to go highest initiative to lowest. So let's say the person with the highest number is going to get first pick from the market, and you might take, you know, an L-shaped tile with a crystal and this worker piece, and then the next person has a lower number and they get to take these different pieces, whatever. Play through the 10 rounds, filling out your board, and at the end of the game you count points for a variety of different categories. One of the things I like that I'm going to mention before I forget about the scoring is that card system, because you have those cards ranging from 1 to 48, and so not only do they determine when you're playing them, they're going to determine the order that you get to draft or select things. So think of similar to like if you played For Sale, right? You're looking at a pile of, like in For Sale, you're looking at the properties and trying to decide what can I bid or which one am I going to use to get which check. There's a bit of that valuation thing, like what are other players going to play to go, do I think Dylan really wants that tile and that resource, or can I get away with playing something else? At the end of the game, you're going to have 2 cards left, because the 10 you've played, the one each round, get discarded, and whoever has the highest total value of cards, like let's say I had a 12 and an 8 left for 20, and all the other players had lower, I'm going to get like 6 bonus points, and the other players get like 2 or 1. So there's an interesting thing where the worse bids you get, the more points you're leaving yourself for the end of the game, and then you're filling out your board with these different pieces. It's very interesting because there's these build over tokens too. So you get tiles that have symbols on them, but you're gaining other tiles that cover up those symbols. You're gaining these credits that you can spend to take new tiles, and it's a lot more interactive and competitive than I was expecting. It looked like a simple polyomino game. We almost, we also got review copies previously of Nanga Parbat and Biblios Quill and Parchment. We almost turned down a copy of this, and I'm glad we didn't. Mm-hmm. I'm glad we actually accepted it. I'll say right now, this is another play it from me. There's a couple reasons that prevent it from being an own it. The first is going to be that the stack of cards that determine which resources come out, there's only 10 in the game. So every time you play, you're going to see the exact same 10 cards with the same resources that come up on the table. So I would have liked a little more variety from game to game, because especially they're not like they're in randomized slots. Like slot 1 is always the same thing on every card or whatever. So you're going to see a lot of the same stuff from game to game. I will also quickly mention that there's a solo mode to this, which plays over 10 rounds, but it plays a little bit differently. You're basically trying to fill out your board with one of every type of component, and if your board isn't filled up, it's just a win or lose thing against the opponent. But yeah, I've kind of lost track of what the other complaint was that I wanted to mention before, so maybe I'll come back to that.
There are no other complaints.
No, but I would say, and of the player counts, I've only played it solo and with 3. I haven't played it with 2 or with 4. I would say with 3 players is my favorite player count so far. I think 3 or 4 would probably be best, because when you're doing the reveal with the initiative of the drafting and which things you're taking, and there's limited resources that you're all racing to, is like, I think it works best. Like, I definitely enjoyed it way more with 3 than I did solo.
I think it's just like also, like you said, like if you're playing with 2, and it's like, oh, you beat me in initiative, I get second picks. Like, the worst you can do is just going after. With 3 or 4, that could be a huge difference between first and fourth.
Yeah,
so you have to be more aggressive with the initiative cards, and it matters a little bit more. Like, that's my favorite thing about the game. 100% was the initiative cards and having to like prioritize when you use them, when you hold back. And same thing with you. My least favorite. The concern I had was just that the deck of cards was low, which means that after a while, if you play this a lot, you could look at what hasn't come out yet and be familiar with being like, well, we haven't got the one that has this yet, and you can kind of math it out a little bit.
Right.
Where I like having that variety, so you can never quite figure out exactly what's there.
Right.
This was a huge surprise for me when we honestly Steve Finn is quickly becoming one of my favorite designers. I'm finding that a lot of his game design choices in this game is in general resonate with me. And mining quality surprised me on so many levels. The way that the initiative cards work, the way you're having to place your resources, and the competition between the players. Like
exactly,
there's a limited amount of the things you have to grab. And there was one time where I jumped the gun and I grabbed one, and you're like, oh, actually, I hadn't grabbed this yet. Like I got that.
Right.
It's no longer available for you. I'm like, oh my god, like.
And you can start committing
supply.
And because there's things where you need like a worker here and a ship here, and the outpost can go in the middle. Sometimes you already got the worker and you got the ship, and then someone snags that last outpost, and now you have those other two pieces that are there that won't amount to anything. Yeah. And we all three of us sitting on the table were realizing like, man, this is really hard. Like, how do I fit this in? How do I get this piece? And sometimes you're just wasting pieces and taking credits in exchange. And there's a lot of cool stuff going on. The thing that I wanted to mention, the other second complaint that prevents it from being an Own It for me is just that all the different pieces that you put on the board, I wish there was either that they were a little more thematic or that there was a little more difference between them, because there's the 4 different colors of crystals, and it's basically just like you put a purple crystal here and then another one 2 spaces away, and then you can put a purple science station between them. And it's just like all the colors work the same, and then the workers were kind of the same worker ship, and then an outpost can go between them. Like thematically, it was just a little bit like samey. So I felt like there was a bit of a lost opportunity with like the theme could have come out a little more, and there could have been a bit more variety in those cards, like I said. But otherwise, it's one that I highly recommend checking out. And because of the very low complexity rules and the short playtime, 40 minutes, like this is one that I can recommend as a much easier game to just try it out once compared to, for example, the one I just spoke about, Corrosion. So Mining Colony is a very interesting design, and like Dylan said, Steve Finn is always doing really interesting stuff with his games. So recommend you check it out, and that's going to be a Play It. Again, that is Mining Colony, which was sent to us as a review copy.
Awesome. The last game we're going to look at, we each picked a game that is older, that isn't a new title to look at. Mine is a lot older. What year did this come out?
It was like 2004 or something.
2004, okay. I thought it was even older than that. But yeah, we're almost at 20 years.
It looks older, but
Yeah, and so this is a Reiner Knizia game, and it is, I think, the oldest Reiner Knizia game I've played now, maybe? I shouldn't have said that.
No, Modern Art is like 90 something.
It's just because the new box of Modern Art.
I know, it's true.
But it is one I got recently because I've heard it talked about and because it has some elements from other games I want to check it out. And that is Ingenious, which is apparently the ultimate family strategy. I don't know about that, but it is a pretty good one.
I mean, it's printed right on the box.
I guess,
How can you
can't
argue?
argue. So this is an interesting game. So it's a tile laying game where it's like domino style tiles that each have a color on one side of the domino, or each side can have the same color. And you're going to be playing on a board that starts with some colors already on there as well. Different player counts, you're going to use different amounts of the board. It kind of scales that way. And what you're doing is you're trying to connect the light colors to each other. But every time I place one, like let's say I place this blue next to a bunch of different blues that already existed, you're going to score not for just the total number. It's not like you look and say, oh, there's now 5 blues, I score 5. You're actually looking in lines from each side of the hexagon, which is why they're hexagons instead of like just square dominoes. You go in a line on each flat face and you count how many of that same color in each line, and then that's how many points you score. You add all those up every time you place a tile. So that scoring is interesting, but even more interesting is at the end of the game, you're only going to score for the color that you scored the least in over the entire course of the game. So you have to balance everything you're doing. You can't just say, oh, I had a really good green game this game. Well, if you did and you didn't do anything for yellows, you score for yellow. So you're finding that you're constantly having to balance what you're scoring, but your opponent is aware of that. And so if I notice that Carlo is low on yellow, I might start to place tiles just to block his yellow expansion to make it harder for him to score yellow, and he might do the same for the one that I am doing really well on or whatever. It's just that aspect of it makes it so that there's tons of competition for board space, and there's moments where all of a sudden you block someone out and they go and say, oh my god, I can't place any more blues now without having to start a new one. And you go, yep, that's what I did. I did that to you. And it just feels so great. And then they have to go take that mechanic back. So it's a really cool game. And I understand why it says like the ultimate family strategy game, because it's really accessible and easy for anyone to play. But if myself and Carlo sat down, compared to if we were playing with like kids or people that are more casual gamers, we would approach this game much more cutthroat and more ruthless in the same way that we, in moments we've had in Renature, it reminded me of that when I was playing, thinking like, oh, I could easily see myself being like, oh, you think like you're doing really good maintaining this. Well, I'm going to block off your purple. Now I'm going to block off your blue. And now you're like, well, scrambling to try to get those ones because you can't get your yellow too far ahead without having those maintained, right? So really cool stuff going on and really easy to learn and teach. It actually does have a solo mode too. I haven't tried the solo mode yet, but it's interesting in a game like this, like a tile-line game, that it has a solo mode.
Yeah, especially something so interactive.
Yeah, and again, quick playing. I think it says 45 minutes. I could easily see on 2 players, you getting even a little bit under that when you get the flow down. And it plays quick. You have a sort of a Scrabble like tray that rack. Yeah, exactly, that has your discs that you can always your dominoes that you can always be looking at. So it's going to be a play it for me. It's not quite like a quintessential game that I think you need to be owning, that like needs to be on your shelf like other Reiner Knizia games I might think that of, but it does have enough going on that if you, especially, I think the only time that I would struggle to like wonder if it's going to stay in my collection is because I have so many games in my collection, that there are other ones that do things like this that maybe gets replaced or just overshadowed by other games. But especially if you're missing a game like this in your collection, or a lighter family strategy game that can also be played more intensely with the right person, I think that this is one I could see someone owning and then being like, oh my, I'm playing this every weekend. Like we always throw down a quick half an hour game or whatever, or you've won 2 in a row, or we do a best of 7, whatever the case may be. I think it has that kind of longevity to it.
Cool.
Yeah. It's honestly a great game.
I'm surprised you didn't mention Witchstone at all, because it seems like Witchstone borrowed right from this with the dominoes and the pot. Like
I when I bought it, that was the comparison that I was like, it was almost making me get it right away. As I was like, oh, this kind of, and someone I think had mentioned, it's like it takes a bit of Witchstone takes a bit of Ingenious on this aspect.
Yeah, but, like obviously not all the other stuff on the board, but I just mean like the domino thing with triggering the.
But honestly, the only thing it really has in common with Witchstone there is the shape of the domino tiles and that you're placing them, because Witchstone, it's triggering specifically on the cluster. Oh, there's 5 here, you get 5 actions. Oh, there's 6 here, you get 6 actions. Ingenious is doing this line thing with scoring off them. So they're both doing very different things with the same physical component, that the comparison didn't like go stretch far beyond just the fact that they happen to be a hexagon.
Right.
Dominoes.
So Witchstone doesn't just feel like a souped up Ingenious to you.
No. It feels like he liked his hexagon dominoes and brought them back, found a place to bring them back. But the actual way that they integrate and work is I think different enough that there's not too many similarities beyond that. But cool. Either way, I definitely play it. I think everyone should try it out, and I think it's going to kind of matter based on what your collection currently owns, whether it's an own it. But for me, it'll be a play it, and I have enjoyed my sessions with it, and I'm going to keep introducing people to it as well.
Cool. I have to say that the most intriguing thing to me about this game is the thing that it shares in common with Tigris and Euphrates, which is which is the scoring. Yeah. The lowest color score. I love that aspect of having to divide your attention equally, and
same thing
players
with,
can block you from
between 2 castles of between 2 castles of Mad King Ludwig, also between 2 cities, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's a really cool mechanic, and it makes it really hard to figure out how you're going to score and everything.
Exactly.
So, that's Ingenious. That's a play it.
Can't wait to play it.
Can't wait to play it.
Yeah. I'm just surprised to hear, one of the other videos you said, skip this Reiner Knizia game. Now it's just play this Reiner Knizia game.
The next time we do, it'll just be 3 Knizia games that are all own its, and I'll make up for all this shaming of Knizia.
Exactly. All right, and the final one I'm looking at today is called Friday. So this is designed by Freedom and Friesa. This is a solo-only game.
Put this down. I think it's blocking our faces a little bit.
Yeah. Massive box over here just towering over us. Yeah, this is a solo-only game published by Rio Grande Games. This is one that I'd heard about for many years and always thought, oh, maybe I should try this game one day. I was cooled a little bit on deck builders over the past couple of years, but still like deck builders quite a bit. So this is a fairly inexpensive game too. It's like $25, and the basic idea is you are Friday, and you're helping Robinson Crusoe, who is sort of his boat is capsized on your island. You're trying to help him escape the island. So you have a deck of these Robinson cards that comprise your deck, and the game has different difficulty levels from 1 through 4 in there. It says that the real game is level 4 once you can work your way up to it, but to start, a lot of people have said this is a really tough game. I've seen a lot of people say they've never beaten it, or that it's tough to beat it on the final level or whatnot. But basically what you're doing on your turn is you have a deck of these hazard cards, and you're going to flip 2 of these hazards over, and they might say like, cannibals and whatever, jungle or something like that, and you pick which one of them you're gonna try to overcome, and you set the other one aside into the discard pile, and it's gonna tell you a total strength value that you need to meet. So it might say like strength 4, and it'll tell you how many cards from your deck you can flip to meet that number. And then you're sort of pushing your luck, flipping cards, and you can stop flipping whenever you want because there's bad cards in your deck, there's good cards. Sometimes you don't want to keep burning extra cards if you don't need them. And then basically if you overcome the hazard, you flip the card upside down, and that card goes into your deck, and now you have a new card with a new ability. If you lose the hazard, or if you fall short, let's say the required strength was 5 and you only had 2 strength, you're short by 3, you lose 3 life, but you can also now trash up to 3 cards from your deck.
Oh, that's
so you're
cool.
starting to it's a really interesting game because you have to decide how early on in the game do you want to start thinning out your deck, which hazards do you want to go for, because you can see right on them if I defeat this hazard or I overcome it, which card, which ability do I want to maybe gain in my deck, but can I overcome? Is this hazard tougher? Once you go through the hazard deck once, it goes up to level 2 and the numbers go up. And then once you go through it another time, it goes up to level 3 and then you're on the hardest difficulty. The other really cool thing is that your Robinson deck, every time you go through your own deck of cards, before you flip it over and reshuffle it and start drawing, you have to take one of these aging cards in. Basically, your character Robinson ages. So you're putting in these negative cards that give you worse abilities that hamper you. So the quicker you thin your deck, the more efficient your deck is, the quicker you're getting to these better cards, but also the more you run through your deck, the quicker your guy ages. And if you run through the deck 10 times and you can't age anymore, you basically die of old age before you get off the island. So it's all this really cool stuff, and then basically if you make it past that 3rd level, you have to defeat these 2 pirate ships and escape the island. Very cool game, very tough. I tried it on the very lowest difficulty, just difficulty 1 the first time I played. I think I lost my first 2 times, even on the easiest difficulty.
Wow, shame.
Then I had to, I know. Since then, I've beaten it on difficulty 1, 2, and 3. I haven't gone to difficulty 4
now you're showing
yet.
off.
No. I just admitted I haven't even beaten it on what they consider the real game to be. So this is going to be another Play It. I know that's 3 for 3 on Play It. And the only reason I would say that this isn't an Own It is just because of the type of game it is. It feels like the type of game where once I beat it on difficulty 4, yeah, I might go back to it once or twice to see if I can beat my high score because it gets you to keep track. But other than that, this seems like one of those games where once you beat it, there's going to be a lot less incentive to go back to it. Same as when I think about Fox and the Forest Duet. I know that's a cooperative 2-player game, but it's a lot of those games where it's hey, we've achieved that, less reason to go back to it kind of thing. Yeah. And even just play to play, there's, I don't want to say it's formulaic, but there's almost a figuring out how to be better, more efficient, and how to do better at the game. And once you know that, I feel like you're not going to do something, you're not going to take these wildly different strategies the next time. There's kind of hey, I figured it out. Now I'm going to, get better and more efficient. And then once you beat it, I just don't see a whole lot of reason to go back to it. So it's one of those games, if you have an opportunity to try it at a board game cafe or borrow it from a friend for a little while, I think that's maybe the optimal way to play it, because personally, I don't think this is going to stay in my collection forever. But it's an excellent game, really, really cool twist. I haven't seen deck building done quite like this, and in a solo-only game, it's done really well.
That's interesting that you say that, because that's almost the wall that most solo games are working against, right? Is that when you play a game with other people, I can win a game, we can sit down and play Ingenious or Corrosion, and I can win, and yet that doesn't stop me from wanting to play again, because I'll do things differently. I might play with different people, so yeah, I can win.
And because your opponents are unpredictable, you don't know what they're going to do.
In solo games, when a game functions without high scores, or at least that's not the main way, it's just saying can you beat the game? Once you beat it, it's hard to give yourself reason to go back, because it's I won it already. And if I do something different, no one's here to witness it. I'm doing this for myself, right?
And because you already figured it out. I almost think of it as a boss battle in a video game. Yes. If you lose 10 times and you finally beat that boss, you're not going to immediately boot the game up and go fight the boss again. It's you already figured out and beat it. What's the point?
And the amount of video games that are single player that I actually go back and play the entire story once I played it again are low. I only do with a few games. So that's the unfortunate thing with solo-only games, is that the only way to get around that is if they have high scores. Mm-hmm. Because even a game this isn't solo-only, but So Clever, or That's So Clever, yes. Always going back to try to beat your high score actually works really well in that
because
game, right?
You didn't just win or lose the game.
Yes.
How high of a score can you get?
Yeah. So I feel that it's almost that should be something that solo games strive to have more of, to make the longevity longer. It's hard to include and shoehorn into a lot of games, but this is one, honestly, I've wanted to try for so long. And way back when I bought Onirum, it was between Onirum and Friday that I was deciding between solo-only games which one to buy, and I think Onirum plays it too, but it was voted really good at one. And I almost got Friday, so when I found out you got it, it was awesome because I'm hoping to board at some point and try it out.
Once I beat on difficulty 4, I'll definitely lend it to you.
So next year.
Wow. Stay tuned on the channel or I'll make Dylan eat his words.
Live playthrough of Friday, but Carlo doesn't stop, doesn't eat, and doesn't drink until he beats level 4.
Sign me up. But yeah, so that was Friday. Again, that was another play it, but just a quick note, I would say of the 3 that I talked about today that I called play it's, like, this is the one that I would most highly recommend. I think it's the best game of the 3 I've talked about. It's just, again, from the ownership perspective, tough to justify saying go buy a game that is, has limited value, the replay value kind of thing. But yeah, that's Friday by Freedom and Freeze.
Awesome, and those are all the games we looked at today. So that's 6 games. Putting up a little graphic on the screen here so that you can see a quick recap of everything we talked about. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let us know if there's any games you want us to cover, especially when we're talking about older games, especially if it's ones you've seen on the shelf back here or heard us mention in the past, or even if it's a game we don't currently own anymore, but we've played it a bunch in the past. Like, we're always open to including some of these older releases and giving our thoughts on them. So if there's any games you want to see us cover, let us know in the comments, put them in there. Even if it's a newer game and we haven't played it yet, we're always interested in what people want to hear us talk about, and we can always consider buying them and playing them in the future. And other than that, let us know your thoughts on these games. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree? How would you rank them? Own it, play it, skip it. We're always curious to hear. Thank you so much for watching. We'll for sure be back with episode 6 at some point in the future. This is a popular series. We love doing them. And we will see you in the next one.